Hello, this is our presentation over the cultural shifts in 1980s Turkey relating to the book Dare to Disappoint Growing Up in Turkey by Özge Samansi.
Alright, starting off, Dare to Disappoint really shows how cultural shifts affected everyday life of Turkish citizens. Ujce's story highlights how children were shaped by government control. We can see this in the education systems, what they were reading, what they saw on TV, feminist movements, and Western influences. This is because of the alliance with the US at this time. And then her story is also a reflection of a larger cultural struggle in Turkey.
The first topic that was relevant in the 1980s in Turkey was the start of a feminist movement. The movement started after the 1980s coup, where the military overthrew the government. And prior to this time, Turkey had been a really conservative nation. And so the state of the nation following the coup was really shaky, and this opened the opportunity for women to start this feminist movement. However, they did receive some backlash, and people kind of thought that they were trying to take advantage of the political downfall at the time to get their voices heard. Most of the women that were forming this movement had previously been a part of left wing organizations, and they did face their criticisms. The feminist movement was kind of thought about as a middle class movement because the women that were involved were from larger urban areas and they were educated. And other people thought that maybe they had discovered feminism through the West and that Westernization was making them start this feminist movement and that that was bad as well. The feminist movement at the time also feeds into some struggles of Muslim women in Turkey. To start with, let's look back on the history of wearing a headscarf. So, prior to the 1950s, headscarves were related to peasant life, and in the 1950s, people began to migrate into urban areas, and these women that were wearing headscarves got educated, they had these homes, they were kind of moving up in the classes, so to speak, and a new Muslim woman entered the picture of society, and she was still wearing a headscarf. And then during the 1980s, Islam was becoming more and more seen in the public eye, and so were headscarves, especially in a university setting. And some of society really did not appreciate and kind of frowned upon this wearing of the headscarf. And so, to try to remedy the situation, the Education Council had voted on making a turban a modern clothing item, and therefore students would be allowed to wear it. Well, the difference was that the turban was not the headscarf, and so instead of allowing students to wear a turban and getting rid of the Islamic association with wearing a head covering in general, they made the situation worse. Next, I would like to connect the topic of the feminist movement to Dare to Disappoint. So, in the first picture from the book that I have on here, it reads about there were a few girls in the school who came from conservative families, but most conservative families were not inclined to send their daughters to a boarding school. And I just wanted to relate this back to the struggles of Muslim women at the time because this viewpoint made it where seeing a practicing Muslim woman in the educational setting was rare and that there weren't very many of them, and therefore those girls received criticism because they were different and because there were not many of them. And you can see that on the next picture where it talks about the men being intimidated by the girls because there just aren't very many, even women, whether they were Muslim or not, in that educational setting. Then at the bottom of that picture, you can see kind of what the male viewpoint of the women in the educational setting might have been, and that they thought that they were promiscuous and valueless, and that they were brainwashed and westernized when the girls are really just trying to get an education and they aren't trying to force any kind of feminism upon the boys. And then it goes on to say that the girls thought that they were wearing blinders and were extremely dull and just so focused on their conservative beliefs. The next picture kind of shows whenever Uzge was with her roommate Merv and they were waking up all the practicing Muslims for their fast. And Uzge's kind of upset because she doesn't want to wake up because she doesn't practice, but then Merv goes on to say, "Look at your problem, you can't sleep. I want to cover my head with a headscarf because I am Muslim, but the government forbids students to do so in school. So I wear a sweatshirt with a hood, but I have to uncover my head in the classroom." And so it's just kind of showing that Merv can't even properly reflect her values in an educational setting because the government has taken that right away from her, and that Uzge's problems really aren't all that she's making them up to be. And the final connection that I would like to make is when Uzge was doing a school play, and when her teacher picked out the play for them and Uzge had read through it, she discovered that all the women characters do in the play is wash dishes and set the table. And he was forcing her to go recruit other people for the play, and she didn't want any part of that because how is that fair to the women that they don't get to have big parts in the play? But that was just kind of the viewpoint of that teacher at the time, and he didn't really see a reason for women to have big parts when the men could do it.
Okay, moving into television and media censorship. So we already know that the 1980s coup led to corrupt and restricting nation government. And because of this, media, television, newspapers, literature, books, etc., they were all censored. They were just deemed inappropriate and, in general, contradicted family values, which the Turkish government did not like. And at this time, Turkey was entering their liberalization phase, and this lasted until about the 90s. This is also known as the post-coup transition phase, obviously following the coup in 1980s or in 1980. But seditious laws came into effect at this time as well, and these laws criminalized those who criticized the government. Turkey also did not like that. They didn't like people who talked bad about them. And by 1983, press laws came out, and these were a group of laws that really restricted media. Over here to the right, this is actually a grouping of news clippings, and we see this word highlighted. It's Eurorisi, and many times it's put into the newspapers, and this meant warning. This is warning, that's what it translates to in English. And this was just warning people of the censorship, pretty much warning those who wanted to publish things. I thought that was pretty neat. Moving into censorship and literature. When he came into power, General Kenan Evren imposed strict measures to suppress leftist and communist ideas. The majority of this had to do with what people were reading, because we already know that words have a lot of power. Over here to the right, if we look at the picture from the book, on the stack of books there, if we look on the spine, there's a couple of authors who I was familiar with and I wanted to talk about. One of them being Karl Marx. He was a communist. If you ever heard of the word Marxist, that word does derive from Karl Marx. He wrote the Communist Manifesto in 1848 with Friedrich Engels, and this book pretty much called for working class to overthrow capitalism, and it highlights the inequality and unstable relationship between the working class and the wealthy. Why did Turkey not like this? Well, Turkey at this time was an alliance with the US, and they adopted Western ideologies. This book contradicted those ideologies. And the government viewed the leftist movements as dangerous, and the leftists really, this book really fueled their movements even 100 years before. It's still 100 years later from the book was written, it still had a lot of power. And so the government banned Marxist books and a lot of other literature. As of today, it's actually unbanned as of today. And then we look at Nazim Hikmet. Now, his name we are kind of familiar with. He wrote Today is Sunday. He was a committed Marxist, communist as well. He was imprisoned in Turkey for a long period of time and then exiled into Russia. He wrote the Today is Sunday poem in Turkey when he was in prison there. And then as of 2002, he's actually reinstated as a Turkish citizen. But as far as I know, his remains are still in Russia, and they're trying to get him back, but I guess that's what they get for banning him in the first place, right? By 1990s, many literature bans were lifted. Both of these, Today is Sunday and the Communist Manifesto, were lifted, and then as of today, about 500 books are currently listed to get unbanned, so pretty neat. So now taking what I've talked about and how it relates to the book. I talked about what was censored on TV, but I really want to focus on what Turkey allowed on TV. So why did they allow Dallas to air? Well, a lot of people in forums online I've read have said that it served as a distraction to political and economic problems that Turkey was facing, but Dallas also influenced wealth, business, lifestyle, success, and at the time Turkey really strived for this and they loved their money, so they thought that airing this would hopefully influence their citizens to want to adapt this lifestyle for the success and sovereignty of Turkey. And then obviously looking at this vase here, this was the vase that was aired on TV when there was an outburst, and then Uche goes the next day to talk about it in class, and then she gets the ruler smack to the hand. Probably would not have felt really good, but this was because of the strict authoritarian discipline that schools really imposed. They really enforced obedience, and they just didn't like their students their academic pupils to be discussing this stuff in class.